When clinicians and people like that decided that they wanted to, start working with psychedelics, mushrooms were obviously the one to use because in some ways mushrooms are the ideal psychedelic.
Right.
More than LSD or mescaline or some of these things.
And more than DMT?
More than DMT.
Why is that?
Again, because the DMT only lasts 20 minutes.
Right. Well, unless you do it with the ayahuasca, in the form of ayahuasca.
And if you do it with ayahuasca, it lasts 6 hours or so. But ayahuasca is a botanical formulation. It's complex and all that.
Right.
And but psilocybin, you can synthesize it. And of course, clinical trials, the FDA likes. They want to work with pure compounds. They're very biased toward pure compounds. You can work with natural drugs, but generally, if you're like an investigator, like Roland Griffiths, for example, at Johns Hopkins, people that started doing clinical studies, they expect you to do it with pure compounds. And psilocybin's easy to make if you're a good chemist. Albert Hofmann synthesized it in 1958. And so it sort of kept it on the radar. And then when people were looking at it from a therapeutic point of view, psilocybin seemed a natural choice. And it has a lot of things that recommend it, because it lasts about the right amount of time. It's 6 or 7 hours. Like LSD is 12 to 18 hours, depending. Mescaline is, you have to take higher doses, and it lasts a long time. So it lasts about the same time. It's very non-toxic. It's totally compatible with human metabolism. And it's a kick-ass psychedelic. I mean, depending on the dose, it can be a fairly mild experience, but still very interesting. Or in a higher experience, it can be, complete with visions and all that. And it can really be, it can really be therapeutic. Like Wade Davis often says, a story he tells. He said, "Well, our parents." Back in the 60s, they would say, you must never take these things because if you do, you'll never be the same again.
Right.
That's the fucking point.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So, yeah, that goes to something I wanted to ask you. Like, do you think there is a fundamental change in the brain that lasts, and how long does it last when you take these psychedelics, whether it be ayahuasca, DMT, or psilocybin? And is there like something that is unlocked? Or
Yes. The answer is the data is coming out that in fact there are long-term changes in the brain in a beneficial way. So there are short-term changes. There's the trip that you have,
right.
And the trip that you have. The therapeutic sort of mechanism behind the benefits of psychedelics, whether it's psilocybin or LSD or whatever. You've heard of this concept of the default mode network?
Mm-mm.
Oh, that's a neuroscience term. The default mode network is basically the neural mechanisms that internal neural feedback mechanisms that maintain what we call ordinary consciousness effectively.
Okay.
Our focus on space and time, our sense of self and being
Survival.
localized. Ordinary consciousness.
Okay.
That's the default mode network. Most of the time, the default mode network is where you want to be. Because you want to be functional. You want to be able to drive a car and get up and go to work, pay the mortgage, do these things, ordinary functioning. But it can also be a trap. And particularly for people with intractable depression and that sort of thing, their default mode network in some ways is dysfunctional. And they don't, they're in these feedback loops that are that are harmful, that are not supporting their mental health. What the psychedelics do is they temporarily disable that default mode network. They effectively let you step out of your reference frame. That's another way to think of it.
Yep.
It lets you look at your situation from a different perspective. You've stepped out of your reference frame. So if you look at your depression or your trauma, your addiction, or various problems that you're facing, you can look at that in a different way. And in that way, you can sort of defuse it. You can sort of overcome that, and you can resolve a lot of those things. So that's the immediate, therapeutic benefit of something like psilocybin. And one session may do it, or it may take 2 or 3. But basically, it will resolve it. However, what they now know is there are persistent changes that last longer than that, long after the trip is over. What we're seeing is, and by we, I mean neuroscientists, not me. So, this is all in the literature. What's happening is there is a change in connectivity of the synapses in the brain, sort of a change that reflects these changes that you're having in the therapeutic state. Connectivity, and also, the 2 words are synaptogenesis, forming of connections between neurons, and neurogenesis, which is growth, actually, of new neurons.
Wow.
Psilocybin and other psychedelics initiate these processes. So yes, it rewires your brain in ways that are beneficial, largely.
I noticed this this could have been placebo, but I noticed after the DMT, which I've never noticed with anything else, is that I felt like I was thinking differently.
Yeah, you do.
Like I was able to see problems from multiple angles at once. It was very strange.
That's exactly right. It changes your perspective on things, and this can be very, very helpful and very therapeutic, particularly if you're dealing with something like intractable depression. I mean, so-called major depressive disorder, which is a clinically defined state, is what psilocybin was initially approved for in clinical studies. But now that it's getting approved, it's applied to all these other things. For example, smoking cessation. There are studies with smoking cessation with psilocybin. Lifetime serious cigarette addicts, 3-pack-a-day people over decades, the treatment with psilocybin over 3 or 4 treatments with the proper integration, preparation, all that, 3 or 4 treatments, 80% of those people stopped smoking. Wow. Just stopped. And you know why? Being experienced myself with psilocybin and also a former smoker, psilocybin didn't make me stop smoking. Various other things did. But I think what people, if they come into it with a real sincere desire to stop smoking, they have this experience and they look at what they're doing to their body and how, they're poisoning themselves. And it's like the reaction is repulsion or revulsion, and it's like they're able to stop. Yeah. And no other treatment for smoking cessation even comes close. 80% of the sample, these were lifelong smokers.
That's so fascinating.
This is all done at Johns Hopkins. This is Matt Johnson's work, basically, one of Roland Griffith's proteges at the time. So that's an example of these things. But the thing is, you do not have to be sick to benefit from psychedelics. It's approved for therapeutic uses, but things like PTSD and addiction and so on. But it can be used to benefit well people as well, because it does. It improves your outlook. It improves the way that you think. In fact, one of my colleagues, I was going to recommend that you bring him on the podcast, a good friend of mine and Terrence, a guy named Bruce Damer.
How do you spell his last name?
Damer.
Okay.
He's an exobiologist. He's an engineer and a biochemist, and he studies exobiology is the study of extraterrestrial life. Well, there is no extraterrestrial life that we have to study right now.
Right.
So what he studies is the origin of life. And he and his colleagues have developed some very groundbreaking theories about the origin of life. And you can look him up. You can look up his website and all that. But what's interesting is that psychedelics has been very useful to him as a creative tool, effectively as a scientific tool, a tool for thinking about nature and new processes. He's even founded an organization called minds.org, which is he and some colleagues are developing structured protocols to use psychedelics to apply to scientific problems. Because again, it's this ability to step out of your usual reference frame.
Yes.
You can look at your own problems. You can also look at nature, and you can see things about processes, about natural processes that you miss. One of the things I often say about psychedelics, they bring the background forward.
Yes, that's
right?
a great way of putting it.
That's the default mode network. The default mode network is defined by what it excludes from your awareness, right? Because it makes sure that your attention is focused on the immediate things you need to survive. And if you're on the freeway at 90 miles an hour, you really don't want elves materializing out of the. You don't need that. That's not.
Yeah.
But if in a controlled state, and this is why the concept of set and setting is so important. In the proper set and setting, you're in a situation where you can let that default mode network dissolve. And then all the things that it's filtering out can come in, and you can experience them in a non-threatening situation. And you can experience this background, which is always there, but we're genetically and evolutionarily programmed to exclude those things. Especially in the West. An indigenous person has much less of this. If you go into a forest with an indigenous person, who lives in nature, that person is likely to notice processes that are always going on, but you don't see them. You don't see them until they're pointed out, right? Because you're programmed not to see them.
Like what kind of processes are you talking about?
Just anything you might look at, the way an anthill works, the way the sun lands on a leaf, the way, the way ecosystems work and all of this. You can sort of, psychedelics can be a lens. Effectively, it's like a scientific instrument. You can train that. You can look at phenomena, maybe things that you've looked at before that you feel that you understand very well. But when you look at them from the psychedelic perspective, you notice things that you never noticed before. Right. And this has been proven. I mean, there are people who have won Nobel Prizes based on this. Kary Mullis, for example, is famous for, he discovered the PCR.
PCR, yeah.
Yeah. And he's quite out front. He was like, LSD, gave me the tools to understand this process, that gave me the ability to, as he put it, get down among the molecules and see what was going on.
Yeah.
And so Bruce Damer and his colleagues are they're trying to develop, structured protocols to use psychedelics for this kind of thing, for problems in physics, chemistry, mathematics, and so on. All these people are, obviously far gone nerds, but very, very smart people.